Hello, fellow miners at the coal face of meaning, and welcome to part 3 of introductions. Now, there will be an additional part 4, but that will be when we revise an introduction that already exists in light of everything that we've learned in parts 1 to 3. So, let's get started. Part 3, the middle. Review. An introduction has 3 goals: to draw readers in, to make readers comfortable, and to make it plain to readers what you're going to talk about. We are now covering the second goal, to make readers comfortable. Let's use our guest metaphor again. You may remember that I said you wouldn't give your guest a cursory greeting, then announce what you're going to discuss. Hello, we're going to talk about death. You would take their coat and offer them something to drink, invite them to sit down, and so on. Your middle sentences are the bridge from hello to we're going to talk about death. The part where you take the reader's coat, invite them to sit down, etc. So, essentially, for a sample paragraph, we're going to ease our reader from our first sentence, the early modern period hated women, to our thesis. Elizabeth Cary's play, Mariam, the Fair Queen of Jewry, shows the flaws in this misogyny. Now the question is, how do we do that? We do it like this. The early modern period hated women. Their medical texts asserted that women were filled with evil humors. Their social and philosophical works alleged that they were empty-headed chatterboxes and spiteful gossips. Their religious commentaries blamed Eve for man's fall into sin and death. Stop, because it's worth noting that what you've done with this sentence is you've proved your assertion that the early modern period hated women. Okay, so you've made an assertion, you've provided evidence to prove it. You already recognize this move. But what you've also done is you've given the reader a little more information. You've allowed them to see what exactly you mean by the early modern period hated women. You've given them some space to spread out. They're starting to feel more comfortable. Everywhere and anywhere, Renaissance culture made it clear that women were inferior, if not dangerous. So, you've made your assertion, you've given some space to the reader to stretch out and feel comfortable, even as you've provided evidence for your assertion. Now you're explaining to your reader how your evidence proves your assertion, but you're also making a statement that allows them to spread out a little more. Then you have your thesis. And bam, you're in. Note that this works equally well with signposting. So here's a signposted version that hasn't been stretched out so that we can see the gaps between the 3 parts. The early modern period hated women. Their medical texts asserted that women were filled with evil humors. Their social and philosophical works alleged that they were empty-headed chatterboxes and spiteful gossips. Their religious commentaries blamed Eve for man's fall into sin and death. Everywhere and anywhere, Renaissance culture made it clear that women were inferior, if not dangerous. This essay considered the ways in which Elizabeth Cary's play, Mariam, the Fair Queen of Jewry, published in 1613, shows the flaws in this misogyny. Perfect! An excellent introduction. The reader feels stable, they feel comfortable, they feel grounded, they feel stimulated, and they know where the essay is going. Ideal. So the middle portion of your introduction provides a little information, a little context, a little detail that eases the reader toward the thesis. The thesis. There we go. But be careful. You can fall into the trap of stuffing into the middle all the information that seems important to you, or even that's simply just hanging around. Historical background, critical impressions, general information. For example, the early modern period hated women. From 1590 to 1591, for example, more than 100 women were accused of witchcraft in Scotland and tortured to extract confessions, while in a 16th century conduct book, women were described as sharp-tongued gossips unless they be taught by men. Critic Barnaby Holder has called the early modern period, if not the birthplace, then certainly the rooting ground of modern misogyny. Elizabeth Cary's play, Mariam, the Fair Queen of Jewry, was published in 1613, and one critic describes it as a quiet riposte to contemporaneous views about women. The play shows the flaws in misogyny and suggests other ways of looking at women. This paragraph looks like it's doing a good job. You're giving them a little historical background to support your assertion. You're giving them a little sense of the field and what people have to say about the early modern period and their regard for women. It looks like an excellent grounding. This is a problem because it's not. Okay, for one thing, the two facts about the witchcraft in Scotland and the gossip book, and the conduct book, they appear to support your opener, but they're not really connected. They seem more like interesting things than like support shaped to suit the early modern period hated women. They seem more like interesting things than they do like, when I say shaped, what I mean is attached to the first sentence and attached to each other. Your quotation is a good quotation, but it's not really serving a purpose. It's basically just doing the same thing as the two previous facts. And this final quotation about a quiet repose to contemporaneous views about women, it is relevant, but it would actually work better as support for a later point when you talk about, say, the ways in which the play fights against the contemporaneous misogyny. That's an excellent place for this quotation. Okay, now here's the problem. We often forget that the person who's reading our essay has no idea where our essay is going. And this is especially true in the first paragraph. The person who's reading your introduction has no idea what you're going to talk about. Until you hit your thesis, they have literally no idea where it's all going. And they feel uncertain. People don't like to feel uncertain. So your reader is going to be scrabbling to try to figure out what your essay might be about in order to feel more secure. They're going to read your introduction for clues about where the essay is going. And this might be their reaction. Okay? The early modern period hated women. Okay, it's going to be an essay about early modern hatred of women. From 1590 to 1591, for example, more than 100 women were accused of witchcraft in Scotland and tortured to extract confessions. Okay, so this essay is going to be about witches or witchcraft. While in a 16th century conduct book, women were described as sharp-tongued gossips unless they be taught by men. Oh no, wait, it's not going to be about witches or witchcraft. It's going to be about how early modern men felt about women. Or, given this quotation, maybe it's going to be about the role of the early modern period in creating modern misogyny, or given the fact that the person takes a whole half a sentence and a four-word phrase to talk about when the play was published, maybe it's going to be something about something that happened in 1613. 1613 seems really important. Or maybe it's going to be about early modern feminism. I don't know what it's going to be about. I have so many clues and I'm confused. You do not want a confused reader. The reason why you don't want a confused reader is because confused people often get irritated, and you really don't want an irritated reader. So this version of the introduction is confusing. The result of including all this information is not that your reader now knows many useful things, particularly because they can't absorb those things because they're trying to figure out where they're all going. The result of including all this information is that your reader is confused. And you don't want a confused reader, as we just said. So, look at the paragraph that we originally had. The early modern period hated women. Their medical texts asserted that women were filled with evil humors. Their social and philosophical works alleged that they were empty-headed chatterboxes and spiteful gossips. Their religious commentaries blamed Eve for man's fall into sin and death. Everywhere and anywhere, Renaissance culture made it clear that women were inferior, if not dangerous. This does exactly the same thing as those facts and the quotation, but it's more coherent and it's more cohesive. It hangs together. It feels designed to hang together. It feels as if it has a trajectory, in part also because it's tighter. It's just stronger. And if you're not sure what I mean about it hangs together or it's cohesive, it feels as if it was meant to hang together, you can look at the lecture on structure, which is going to be a supernumerary lecture that should be up by the end of the first week in November. Okay, now look at your thesis. This essay considers the ways in which Elizabeth Cary's play, Mariam, the Fair Queen of Jewry, published in 1613, shows the flaws in this misogyny. This single sentence achieves the same result as the two cumbersome sentences in the other paragraph. And by dropping the quite important information about publication, where possible, it's a good idea to give publication date where it seems necessary. Okay? So it drops that important information into a parentheses so that it isn't foregrounded. There is, however, a way to still have all this information, which is not insignificant. This information does good work in that it does give historical background and it does cover what critics have been saying. There is a way to extract it so you have a sleek, jaguar-like introduction, but you still retain all this information. And that is to put it in a second paragraph. So here you can see the information that we have, this about the witches, this about the conduct book, this about Barnaby Holder, who I totally made up, this from Elizabeth Falt, who I also totally made up, and the publication date. Not the publication date, but anyway, okay. So now what you want to do is, with a little bit of reshaping, you can have that as a second paragraph, so you want to reshape it. So I've done that. Mariam was published into a culture of misogyny. A conduct book published in the same period described women as sharp-tongued gossips unless they be taught by men. And Barnaby Holder has called the early modern period, if not the birthplace, then certainly the rooting ground of modern misogyny. Cary's play, which Elizabeth Flatt describes as a quiet riposte to contemporaneous views about women, was itself first presented privately, precisely because the idea of a female public playwright was so bizarre. Cary, then, had much to battle with her representation of the play's heroine, Queen Mariam. Bam! A nice, tight second paragraph. Also, interesting fact, when a play was produced privately in the early modern period, it was called a closet drama, because the closet was your word for your private room. So you'd give the play in your closet. I love saying closet drama because I think it makes me sound cool. Okay, I mean, obviously in the worlds of academia, not in the world outside academia. But, you can go, oh, it was a closet drama. And then you look very sophisticated in literary criticism. Okay, so what you have here is a second paragraph that offers excellent background information. But notice that also it repeats your thesis, so that it becomes a kind of, it's not exactly moving on, it's rather, here's my thesis, oh, and here's some background in the light of which to consider my thesis. Very good second paragraph. Now, let's look at them together. The early modern period hated women. Their medical texts asserted that women were filled with evil humors. You know what? That should be its modern texts, medical texts. I'll fix that in the slides. Okay. I was so excited about closet drama that I forgot that I would look considerably less sophisticated if I confused my pronouns. Medical texts asserted that women were filled with evil humors. Their social and philosophical works alleged that they were empty-headed chatterboxes and spiteful gossips. Their religious commentaries blamed Eve for man's fall into sin and death. Everywhere and anywhere, Renaissance culture made it clear that women were inferior, if not dangerous. This essay considers the ways in which Elizabeth Cary's play, Mariam, the Fair Queen of Jewry, shows the flaws in this misogyny. Mariam was published into a culture of misogyny. A conduct book published in the same period described women as sharp-tongued gossips unless they be taught by men, and Barnaby Holder has called the early modern period, if not the birthplace, then certainly the rooting ground of modern misogyny. Cary's play, which Elizabeth Flack describes as a quiet riposte to contemporaneous views about women, was itself first presented privately, precisely because the idea of a female public playwright was so bizarre. Cary, then, had much to battle with her representation of the play's heroine, Queen Mariam. See how they stick together? Your first paragraph is not confusing because it's clear where it's going and then it gets there. Your second paragraph is filled with information that makes the reader feel even more stable so that you can then reiterate your thesis and they can consider it in light of the stabilizing information. Now you have your clear introduction and your background information, and your reader appreciates the background info more because the introduction has allowed them to feel secure. They know where it's all going. So, in conclusion, except you're never going to say in conclusion, remember that an introduction welcomes the reader, makes the reader comfortable, tells the reader what you're going to talk about. And it does those things with a clear trajectory so the reader isn't confused. And finally, here is a picture of Elizabeth Cary, who wrote The Tragedy of Mariam, or The Fair Queen of Jewry, which is a rockin' play and very interesting. And even if you don't find the play interesting, you have got to find that hair interesting. Imagine doing your hair that way. I'm guessing that she was dressed for a masque or a small play or court entertainment, as my mother would have said. And that is it for this third lecture. As I say, there's a fourth lecture which shows you how to revise an existing introduction. But for the moment, we'll just say, who's got two thumbs and taught you how to write an excellent introduction? This gal. But who's got two index fingers and now knows how to write an excellent introduction? That's right, you! Okay, I'll catch you on the flip side.